Ghosts of the Alamo, The Visitors, Time Forgot. Chapter 1. The Revelation. Victor Adams stood at the edge of his orbital penthouse, the glass walls curving outward to reveal Saturn's rings in their endless sweep. The hum of the city below, Titan's domed capital, was faint, muffled by the insulation of wealth. He had built empires from ore and plasma, from trade routes that spanned a dozen systems. Yet tonight, none of it mattered. The genealogy report hovered in the air before him, projected by the hollow sphere. A name glowed at the center. Lieutenant James Adams, Victor's ancestor, killed at the Battle of the Alamo, 1836. Victor's jaw tightened. A pointless death, he muttered. A sacrifice swallowed by history. Dr. Sandra Traynor, his chief scientist, shifted uneasily beside him. The Alamo is remembered as a symbol of defiance. Your ancestor fought bravely, but... Victor cut her off with a sharp gesture. Symbols don't build dynasties. Survival does. A member of my bloodline should not have ended in that dust and fire. He turned back to the hollow screen, watching the simulation replay. Mexican forces storming the mission, Texian defenders overwhelmed. James Adams, musket in hand, cut down in the chaos. Victor's voice dropped to a whisper. What if he lived? What if the Alamo stood? Sandra frowned. You're speaking of rewriting history. That's dangerous. Victor's eyes gleamed with a cold fire. Dangerous is letting fate dictate my legacy. I have the means, the technology, the wealth. I will not be bound by the past. He pressed his palm against the console. A new projection appeared, dossiers of 12 men and women, each marked with the insignia of the Galactic Force commandos. Discharged, hardened, lethal. Victor smiled. I will hire them, arm them, send them back. My ancestor will live, and history will bend to my will. The penthouse lights dimmed as Saturn's shadow swept across the rings. Victor Adams stood alone, a titan plotting against time itself. Chapter 2. The Recruitment. The hangar stretched like a cathedral of steel, its vaulted ceiling lined with starship hulls and dormant drones. Victor Adams's footsteps echoed across the polished floor as he approached the dozen figures waiting in shadow. They were mercenaries, each one scarred by war. Former Galactic Force commandos, men and women who had fought in campaigns across nebulae and asteroid belts, now exiled from the military for being too deadly, but still lethal. Victor raised his voice, sharp and commanding. Gentlemen, ladies, you've been summoned because you are the best, and because you are expendable. A ripple of laughter broke the silence. Captain Sutton, broad-shouldered with a cybernetic eye that glowed faintly red, stepped forward. Expendable? That's one way to flatter us. What's the job? Victor gestured, and the holosphere projected the image of the Alamo. The mercenaries stared at the crude mission walls, the defenders in ragged uniforms. This, Victor said, is where my ancestor died. I intend to change that. A murmur spread through the group. One of them, a wiry sniper named Marlowe, frowned. You're talking about time travel. That's not a mission. It's a paradox. Victor's smile was cold. Paradox is just another word for opportunity. You will travel to 1836. Earth. You will defend the Alamo. You will ensure my ancestor survives. Sutton tilted his head. And if history doesn't like being rewritten? Victor's eyes gleamed. Then history will learn to obey. The mercenaries exchanged glances. Some smirked, others looked uneasy. But the promise of wealth was undeniable. Victor's fortune could buy entire moons, and he was offering each of them a share. He snapped his fingers, and drones descended from the ceiling, carrying crates. The lids hissed open, revealing weapons disguised as antiquated muskets, but humming with plasma cores. Armor plates shimmered, their AI systems ready to cloak the wearers in 19th century garb. "Your gear," Victor said. "Advanced weaponry, AI-augmented armor. You'll appear as Texian volunteer soldiers, but you'll fight with the power of the future." Sutton picked up a rifle, its barrel glowing faintly. He grinned. "Well, gentlemen, looks like we're about to rewrite a legend of history." The hangar lights dimmed, casting long shadows across the mercenaries' faces. 12 soldiers stood ready, bound not by loyalty but by greed, preparing to march into the past. Victor Adams watched them, his heart pounding with anticipation. The recruitment was complete. The mission was set. The Alamo awaited. Chapter 3. The Technology. The laboratory was buried deep beneath Titan's capital, a vault of glass and steel humming with forbidden science. Victor Adams descended the spiral walkway, his mercenaries trailing behind, their boots echoing against the polished floor. At the center of the chamber stood Dr. Sandra Traynor, her white lab coat fluttering as she adjusted the controls of a massive construct. It resembled a ring of liquid light, shimmering and unstable, its edges rippling like the surface of a disturbed pond. "This," Sandra said, her voice taut with both pride and dread, "is the chronogate, the culmination of decades of research, a doorway carved into time itself." Captain Sutton stepped closer, his cybernetic eye flickering as it scanned the construct. "Looks fragile. You sure it won't tear us apart?" Sandra's lips tightened. "Time travel is not a door. It's a wound. Every incision risks infection across centuries. Step through and you'll be in 1836. But the paradoxes you create will ripple outward. History will resist you." Victor's voice was calm, commanding. "Resistance is irrelevant. My ancestor must live. The Alamo must stand." Sandra gestured to the crates stacked along the walls. "Your equipment has been modified for temporal insertion. Plasma rifles disguised as muskets, armor with adaptive camouflage. AI systems will project the illusion of 19th century uniforms. Drones programmed to scout without detection. But remember, the more advanced technology you use, the greater the risk of destabilizing the timeline." Marlowe, the wiry sniper, lifted one of the rifles. It hummed faintly, its barrel glowing with restrained power. "So we're supposed to fight a war with toys wrapped in costumes?" Sandra's eyes flashed. "These toys could level armies, but use them sparingly. The chronogate can only stabilize for a limited window. If you fail to return before it collapses, you'll be stranded in the past forever." The mercenaries exchanged uneasy glances. Sutton smirked, breaking the tension. "Forever's a long time, but I've always wanted to see history up close." Victor stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the shimmering gate. "You are soldiers of fortune. I am a man of destiny. Together we will bend time to our will." The chronogate pulsed, its light intensifying, casting long shadows across the chamber. The air vibrated with the promise of impossible journeys. Sandra whispered, almost to herself, "God help us all." Chapter 4. The Arrival. The chronogate roared like a collapsing star. Light bent inward, folding space until the laboratory dissolved into a storm of color. The mercenaries stepped forward, their armor humming as temporal currents clawed at them. Then, silence. They emerged beneath a blazing Texas sun. The air was thick with dust and heat, the smell of gunpowder faint but lingering. Cicadas droned in the distance, and the horizon stretched wide, endless plains broken only by the mission walls of the Alamo. Captain Sutton staggered, his cybernetic eye flickering as it recalibrated. "We're here," he muttered, scanning the crude fortress. 1836. No satellites, no comms, just dirt and muskets. Marlowe crouched, running his fingers through the dry soil. Feels real enough. Their armor shimmered, adaptive AI cloaking their futuristic plates in ragged, Texian, mismatched clothing. Plasma rifles disguised themselves as battered muskets, their glowing cores hidden beneath wood and iron facades. Drones buzzed invisibly overhead, cloaked against detection. The defenders of the Alamo, tired, gaunt men, watched from the walls. One of them, a young soldier with soot on his face, called down. "Who goes there?" Sutton raised his musket, smiling faintly. "Volunteers, reinforcements." The gates creaked open, and the mercenaries stepped inside. The defenders eyed them warily, noting their strange confidence, their unnatural precision. Victor's ancestor, James Adams, stood among them, musket slung across his shoulder. His gaze lingered on Sutton, suspicion flickering in his eyes. "You don't look like men from around here," he said slowly. Sutton smirked. "We're exactly where we need to be." Above them, the sun blazed mercilessly. Beyond the walls, Santa Anna's army gathered, drums echoing across the plains. The mercenaries exchanged glances, their armor whispering tactical data into their ears. The Alamo was about to fall. But this time, the future had arrived to fight. Chapter 5. The Clash. The drums of Santa Anna's army thundered across the plains, a relentless rhythm that shook the dust from the walls of the Alamo. Thousands of soldiers advanced in formation, bayonets gleaming beneath the rising sun. Inside the mission, the defenders braced themselves. Muskets were loaded, powder horns clutched tight. Fear mingled with defiance in their eyes. But this time, 12 mercenaries stood among them, ghosts of the future cloaked in ragged period costume. Their AI-augmented armor whispered tactical data into their ears, mapping enemy positions, predicting trajectories. The Mexican cannons roared, stone walls shattering under the bombardment. Smoke filled the air, acrid and choking. Captain Sutton raised his disguised plasma rifle. "Hold until they breach," he ordered, his voice calm amid chaos. The first wave surged forward, ladders scraping against the walls. Texian defenders fired muskets, the shots echoing like thunder. But where powder failed, the mercenaries struck. Marlowe, the sniper, perched atop the battlements, his rifle humming. He squeezed the trigger. Plasma bolts disguised as musket fire tore through enemy ranks, each shot precise, devastating. "Targets down," Marlowe muttered, his AI overlay marking the next wave. The gates splintered under cannon fire. Mexican soldiers poured in, bayonets flashing. Sutton charged, his armor shimmering as it deflected musket balls. He swung his rifle like a club, then fired point blank, an eruption of energy masked as gunpowder. Beside him, Mercenary Jackson unleashed a drone swarm. The machines darted through the smoke, invisible to the naked eye, slicing through enemy lines with beams of coherent light. To the defenders, it looked like divine intervention. One Texian soldier gasped, "What manner of angels are you?" Sutton grinned, blood streaking his face. "Just soldiers." Santa Anna's forces regrouped, pressing harder. The courtyard became a storm of steel and fire. James Adams, Victor's ancestor, fought shoulder to shoulder with the mercenaries. He fired his musket, unaware that the men beside him wielded weapons centuries beyond comprehension. A cannonball smashed into the wall, sending rubble flying. James stumbled, nearly crushed, but Sutton pulled him clear, armor shielding them both. "Stay alive," Sutton growled. "That's the mission." The mercenaries unleashed their full arsenal. Plasma rifles cut swaths through enemy ranks. Armor projected shimmering shields, deflecting volleys of musket fire. Drones strafed the battlefield, their beams invisible but lethal. To the defenders, it was a miracle. To the attackers, It was terror. Soldiers faltered, retreating under the onslaught of impossible firepower. The Alamo, destined to fall, stood firm. Smoke cleared, bodies littered the ground outside the mission walls. The Texian defenders, bloodied but alive, stared in disbelief. James Adams lowered his musket, chest heaving. He looked at Sutton, suspicion mingling with awe. "You fight like no men I've ever seen," he said. Sutton wiped soot from his armor, the AI whispering warnings of paradox instability. "We fight to make history." Above them, the sun blazed mercilessly. The Alamo had survived the day, but the timeline had begun to fracture. Chapter 6. The Consequences. The battlefield was silent now, save for the groans of the wounded and the crackle of smoldering debris. Smoke drifted lazily across the courtyard, carrying with it the acrid stench of gunpowder and something stranger: ozone, the residue of weapons that should not exist in 1836. The Texian defenders staggered among the fallen, disbelief etched into their faces. They had survived what history had promised would be their doom. The Alamo still stood. James Adams leaned against the wall, musket dangling from his hand, his eyes locked on Captain Sutton. "You saved us," James said, voice hoarse. "But I don't understand how. The battle seemed like a fantasy." Sutton's armor whispered warnings in his ear. Temporal instability detected. Probability of paradox escalation, 72%. He ignored it, forcing a grin. "We fight with conviction. That's all you need to know." Beyond the mission walls, the Mexican army retreated in chaos, their ranks shattered by impossible firepower. But the victory carried a cost unseen by mortal eyes. The sky shimmered faintly, as though reality itself were cracking. Clouds twisted unnaturally, forming spirals that defied the wind. Birds fell silent, their flight patterns disrupted. Marlowe, the sniper, adjusted his scope and cursed. "Captain, I'm seeing distortions. The horizon's bending." Sutton's jaw tightened. Temporal storms, history's fighting back. Far in the future, Victor Adams watched the battle replay through fractured hollow feeds. His ancestor lived. The Alamo had not fallen. Victor raised a glass of rare Titan whiskey, savoring the moment. "I have changed destiny," he whispered. "My bloodline endures." But the holosphere flickered, showing anomalies. Maps redrawing themselves, nations collapsing decades too soon, technologies appearing centuries early. The galaxy was shifting under the weight of his interference. Dr. Sandra Traynor burst into the penthouse, pale and trembling. "Victor, you've destabilized the timeline. Entire empires are unraveling. The chronogate is screaming with paradox energy. If this continues, the future itself may collapse." Victor's smile faltered, but only for a moment. "Sacrifices must be made. My ancestor lives. That is all that matters." Inside the Alamo, the mercenaries regrouped, their armor flickering with static. AI voices whispered warnings of erasure. Jackson slammed his fist against the wall. "We weren't hired to destroy the universe. We were hired to save one man." Sutton stared at James Adams, who stood among the defenders, oblivious to the storm brewing around him. "Orders are orders," Sutton muttered. But his voice carried doubt. The mercenaries had won the battle, yet the war, for time itself, was only beginning. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. The night sky above the Alamo writhed unnaturally. Stars flickered, constellations rearranging themselves in impossible patterns. The defenders whispered prayers, believing it to be an omen. But the mercenaries knew better. Their armor screamed warnings: temporal collapse imminent. Probability of erasure, 89%. Captain Sutton stood in the courtyard, his cybernetic eye glowing faintly as it tracked the distortions. The air shimmered, bending like heat haze, but colder. Wrong. He clenched his jaw. Victor's meddling has torn the timeline apart. Marlowe yelled into his helmet mic. We saved the Alamo, sure, but look at the sky. History's unraveling. We're ghosts in a world that doesn't want us. Through fractured hololink, Victor Adams's face appeared above the courtyard, projected by the Mercenaries' armor systems. His expression was triumphant, almost manic. You've done it, Victor declared. My ancestor lives. The Alamo stands. The future is mine to command. Sutton stepped forward, his voice hard. You don't understand. The timeline is collapsing. Nations are vanishing. Our armor says we're seconds away from paradox erasure. Victor's smile was cold. Sacrifices are inevitable. What matters is legacy. My lineage endures. Jackson snarled, slamming his fist against the wall. Legacy. You've doomed billions for one man. We weren't hired to destroy reality. The ground trembled. Walls of the Alamo flickered, shifting between stone and shimmering light. For a moment, the mission dissolved into fragments of alternate histories, sometimes a fortress, sometimes a ruin, sometimes nothing at all. James Adams staggered, clutching his musket. What's happening? He cried. Sutton grabbed his shoulder, steadying him. History's fighting back. You weren't meant to live. And now the world is tearing itself apart to correct it. The mercenaries' armor shrieked, erasure sequence beginning. One by one, soldiers flickered, their bodies dissolving into static. Marlowe looked at Sutton, eyes wide. We're being deleted. In the courtyard, Jackson, the engineer's image, flickered. His drones sputtered, falling lifeless into the dust. Jackson knelt beside them, hands trembling. He had trusted machines more than men, but even machines could not defy time. Guess even tech has limits, he said softly. The drones dissolved, and Jackson followed, erased like circuitry wiped clean. Sutton raised his rifle, staring at Victor's hollow image. You lied to us. You said this was about survival, but it's about obsession. You've shattered the galaxy for your vanity. Victor's voice was defiant. History is clay. I am the sculptor. Sutton shook his head. No, history is glass, and you've broken it. Deidre, the close combat specialist, blood streaking her armor as she stood next to a crumbling wall, blade hummed with hidden energy. She had fought wars across galaxies, but this was different. This was a war against inevitability. She raised her weapon one last time, defiant. I don't surrender. Time swallowed her anyway, her blade clattering to the ground before vanishing. Perched high on the mission roof, Marlowe's rifle hummed faintly. He had always lived for precision, for control. But now the horizon bent unnaturally, targets vanishing before he could aim. He muttered, No shot can fix this. His scope went dark, and Marlowe vanished, leaving only the echo of his discipline. Sutton turned to his squad, what remained of them. We can still fix this if we let the Alamo fall, if we restore the timeline. We might survive. The mercenaries exchanged grim looks. Their mission had changed. No longer protectors of Victor's ancestor, but guardians of time itself. The courtyard erupted in paradox storms, lightning without thunder, shadows without light. The mercenaries braced themselves, weapons raised, not against Santa Anna's army, but against the man who had hired them. Victor's hollow image flickered, his voice echoing across centuries. You will obey me. Sutton leveled his rifle. Not anymore. The mercenaries prepared for their final stand, not against history, but against the arrogance of a man who thought he could own it. Captain Sutton stood atop the battlements, smoke curling around him. His cybernetic eye flickered, warning of imminent erasure. He looked down at James Adams, musket in hand, unaware of the storm raging in time itself. Sutton whispered, "We fought for greed, but we die for history." Chapter 8. The Legacy. Victor Adams stood in his penthouse, glass walls framing Saturn's rings. But the view was wrong. The rings flickered, dissolving into fragments of alternate histories. His holosphere sputtered, financial accounts collapsing one by one. Alert. Holdings erased, corporations never founded, assets non-existent. Victor staggered. No, impossible. The penthouse itself shimmered, its walls fading. He reached for the console, but his hand passed through empty air. The empire he had built, ore mines, plasma routes, fleets of starships, was gone. He rushed into the streets of Titan's capital, but the city was unrecognizable. The towers he had commissioned were absent, replaced by structures built by others. The people bustled past him, their faces unfamiliar, their eyes sliding over him as if he were invisible. Victor shouted, "I am Victor Adams. You know me. You owe me everything." No one turned. No one cared. His wealth had never existed. His name had never been written. His legacy had been erased by the rift he had created. Victor stumbled, his fine clothes flickering into rags. He reached for a passerby, but the man brushed past him, muttering, "Beggar." Victor fell to his knees in the dust of a world that no longer remembered him. His ancestor lived, yes, but the cost was his own existence. Dr. Sandra Trainor's warning echoed in his mind. Time travel is not a door, it's a wound. His hands began to fade, fingers dissolving into static. His reflection in a shop window showed nothing but a blur. Victor gasped, clutching at the air. "No! I changed destiny! I saved my bloodline! His voice faltered as his chest flickered, his body unraveling thread by thread. The crowd walked on, indifferent. No one saw the titan of industry vanish. No one remembered he had ever existed. Victor Adams's final words were swallowed by silence. And then he was gone. Dr. Sandra Trainor watched the chronogate convulse. She had warned Victor, begged him to stop. Now the gate screamed with paradox energy, consuming itself. Her voice broke. "I told you, history isn't clay." The lab dissolved around her, her research erased, her existence forgotten. Epilogue. Ghosts of the Alamo. The Alamo stood silent under the Texas sun, its walls scarred but unbroken. The defenders whispered of angels who had fought beside them, men who wielded fire and light, who turned the tide of battle. Yet no record would ever name them. The mercenaries were gone. One by one they had flickered out of existence, erased by the paradox they had created. Their armor dissolved into dust, their weapons into smoke. To the defenders it was as if they had never been there at all. Captain Sutton was the last to vanish. He stood atop the battlements, watching James Adams reload his musket, unaware of the storm that had been averted. Sutton's cybernetic eye dimmed, his voice fading into static. "We were soldiers of fortune," he whispered, "but in the end, we were guardians of time." Marlowe's sniper rifle lay abandoned, its plasma core extinguished. Jackson's drones fell from the sky, lifeless husks. The squad that had once been 12 was now nothing, ghosts swallowed by history's demand for balance. In the years to come, the Alamo fell as history had always decreed. Back in 1836, James fought bravely as Santa Anna's forces stormed the Alamo. He fell as history demanded, musket in hand, his sacrifice remembered. He never knew that 12 ghosts had fought beside him, nor that their intervention had nearly rewritten the world. The defenders all became martyrs, their names etched into the annals of Texas. No one spoke of the mercenaries. No one remembered their intervention. The timeline had healed itself, erasing every trace of their presence. In the future, Victor Adams was gone, erased from existence. His wealth, his empire, his name, all vanished. But the mercenaries left behind something intangible, the knowledge that history could fight back, that time itself had a will. They had been hired for greed, but they died for something greater. Their legacy was not wealth or victory, but silence. The Alamo remained a symbol of defiance, and the mercenaries, forgotten, erased, were its unseen guardians, remembered only by the winds that whispered through the ruins. Ghosts of the Alamo, the visitors' time forgot. The end. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you.